In the tranquil suburban neighborhood where I resided, an unspeakable tragedy shattered our peace. A precious young girl, barely 5 years old, vanished without a trace. Her laughter, once a melody that filled the air, now echoed only in our heavy hearts. I vividly recall that fateful day when the news broke, sending shockwaves throughout our community. I was a young woman then, living a carefree life. But the story of the missing girl cast a long shadow over my days. The media relentlessly chronicled every morsel of information, fanning the flames of our collective anguish. It was as if an invisible hand had reached into our hearts and squeezed, leaving an unfillable void. The little girl, whose name was Emily, was last seen riding her bicycle in her backyard. Her parents, consumed by desperation, clung to the hope that she would be found alive. Days turned into nights, and nights merged into endless weeks, but Emily remained missing. As a resident of the same county where my brother worked as a seasoned detective, I received first-hand updates on the investigation. His grim expression and haunted eyes spoke volumes about the horrors he had witnessed. One fateful evening, my brother shared a chilling revelation that would forever alter my perception of human depravity. He had interrogated the girl's neighbor, a seemingly ordinary man who lived just a stone's throw away. To my astonishment, this man had confessed to the unthinkable crime of abducting and murdering Emily. My brother, using his uncanny ability to penetrate the darkest recesses of the human mind, had drawn a vivid and gruesome picture of the horrific events that transpired. According to the murderer's confession, he had lured Emily into his home with the promise of candy. Once inside, he bound her tiny hands and feet, smothering her cries with a suffocating garbage bag. He described in sickening detail the thrill he derived from extinguishing her young life, reveling in his macabre conquest. But the most depraved aspect of the story was the fact that he had participated in the search for Emily alongside her distraught father. As the man wept inconsolably for his missing daughter, the killer remained by his side, his evil smirk hidden beneath a veil of false empathy. When the father confronted the killer upon discovering his heinous crime, my brother intervened, preventing a bloody rampage. The devastated father begged for a moment of solitude with his daughter's murderer, but the authorities, fearing for the man's safety, denied his request. Emily's body was eventually recovered, her tiny frame still encased in the same garbage bag that had been used to suffocate her. The news of her discovery sent a collective shudder through our community. We had lost an innocent soul to the most depraved form of evil. As the trial commenced, I found myself unable to ignore the grotesque details of the crime. The courtroom was transformed into a stage for human depravity, where the killer's twisted mind was laid bare for all to witness. He reveled in the attention, boasting of his heinous actions with a chilling lack of remorse. I couldn't shake the image of Emily's terrified little face as the garbage bag tightened around her head. The thought of her struggling for breath, her tiny body writhing in agony, haunted my dreams and turned my stomach into a knot of nausea. The jury, composed of ordinary citizens like myself, listened intently to the harrowing testimony. The evidence against the killer was overwhelming, and his guilt was undeniable. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I watched as he was led away in handcuffs, his cold, piercing gaze meeting mine for a brief moment. It was a look devoid of humanity, a glimpse into the abyss of a soul that had succumbed to darkness. In the aftermath of the trial, I struggled to reconcile the existence of such unspeakable evil in our world. How could a human being be capable of such a heinous act? The scars of that tragedy remain etched into my memory, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of ordinary facades. I was in high school, a kid lost in the labyrinth of teenage angst and burgeoning adulthood, when it happened. It was a Friday afternoon, the air thick with the smell of freshly cut grass and the lingering scent of the cafeteria's greasy fries, as we all shuffled into Mr. Davies' history class. The day was ordinary, predictable, until the whispers started. They began as a hushed murmur, a faint breeze rustling through the classroom's foliage of gossip, and quickly escalated into a storm. "Did you hear about Mark and his dad?" Missing? Out fishing? They haven't been seen since Saturday. Mark was a year above me, a lanky kid with a perpetual smile and a mop of unruly brown hair. He was one of those guys everyone liked, the kind who could effortlessly navigate the social minefield of high school, a constant fixture at the popular table in the cafeteria. His dad, a burly man with a booming laugh, was a well-known figure in our small seaside town. They were inseparable, two peas in a pod, always out on their boat, casting lines and chasing the elusive catch. The whispers grew louder, punctuated by gasps and hushed exclamations. The news spread like wildfire, igniting a frenzy of fear and speculation. The fishing scene in our town was a tight-knit community, and the disappearance of Mark and his dad sent shockwaves through it. It was as if the very foundation of our safe haven had been shaken. That weekend, the town was consumed by the mystery. Search parties scoured the bay, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and dread. News helicopters buzzed overhead, their cameras capturing the desperate search efforts. The Coast Guard joined the hunt, their cutters slicing through the choppy waters, their radar screens flickering with unanswered pleas. The initial assumption was that they'd been caught in a sudden storm, their boat capsized by monstrous waves. The weather, though unpredictable, had been calm the previous weekend. But the bay could turn on a dime, its placid surface disguising treacherous currents and sudden squalls. Days bled into weeks, and the hope began to dwindle. The search parties were called off, their efforts futile in the face of the vast, unforgiving ocean. All that remained was a growing sense of unease and a chilling emptiness where hope once bloomed. The town clung on to the belief that the missing pair were simply lost at sea, their bodies swallowed by the ocean's insatiable maw. But a seed of doubt, a nagging suspicion, began to take root in my mind. They were seasoned fishermen, skilled navigators, and strong swimmers. Why were there no bodies? Why was their boat found adrift, empty and silent like a ghost ship? The days turned into months, then years. The initial flurry of media attention subsided, replaced by a dull ache of unanswered questions. We moved on, or at least tried to, but the memory of Mark and his dad lingered, a haunting reminder of the capricious power of the sea and the chilling possibility that something more sinister was at play. 8 years had passed since their disappearance. The ache in the town's collective memory had dulled, but the mystery remained, a jagged scar on the landscape of our shared experience. I had moved on, graduated high school, gone to college, and built a life for myself. Yet, the unanswered questions about Mark and his dad continued to haunt me. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, flipping through channels on the television, I came across a documentary about unsolved mysteries. There, on the screen, were Mark and his dad, their faces frozen in time, their smiles haunting. The documentary recounted the circumstances of their disappearance, the search efforts, the unanswered questions. I was drawn in, transfixed by the familiar images and the chilling narrative. As the documentary progressed, a new detail was presented. The boat, when found, had been stripped of its equipment, the fishing rods, the life jackets, even the engine. It was as though someone had meticulously dismantled the vessel, leaving nothing but a hollow shell. The documentary ended with a plea for information, urging anyone with knowledge of the case to come forward. The documentary sparked a fire in me, a thirst for answers that had long been dormant. I felt compelled to delve deeper, to unravel the mystery that had haunted me for years. It was as though something within me had been awakened, a primal urge to find closure, to understand the truth, no matter how dark or disturbing it might be. I began with the local archives, poring over newspaper clippings and police reports, piecing together the fragmented puzzle of the case. I interviewed old friends, neighbors, and fellow fishermen, seeking any shred of information that might have been overlooked. I scoured the internet, trawling through online forums and social media groups, desperate for any clue, any flicker of light in the darkness. My investigation led me down a rabbit hole of speculation, conspiracy theories, and dead ends. I encountered a web of secrets, lies, and hidden agendas, a twisted underbelly of our seemingly idyllic coastal town. I learned about local rivalries, whispers of illegal fishing operations, and the hushed rumors of a mysterious figure known only as the Shadow. who preyed on unsuspecting fishermen and left no trace. The more I dug, the more convinced I became that Mark and his dad's disappearance was no mere accident. Something sinister had happened, something that had been carefully concealed, hidden beneath layers of lies and silence. One day, while scouring the archives of a local newspaper, I stumbled upon an article from the time of their disappearance. It was a brief report, tucked away on the back page, about the discovery of a human skull, washed ashore near the town's abandoned pier. The article mentioned that the skull showed signs of trauma, but the identity of the victim remained unknown. My heart pounded in my chest. Could this be Mark's skull? It was a long shot, but the thought sent a shiver down my spine. I immediately contacted the local police department, requesting access to the case file. The police were reluctant at first, hesitant to relive the painful memories of the unsolved case. But after several persistent calls, they finally agreed to meet with me. I presented them with my findings, my research, and the article about the skull. The detective, a weathered man with tired eyes, listened intently, his face betraying no emotion. After I finished, he sighed, a deep, weary sigh that spoke volumes. He confirmed that the skull had been discovered around the time Mark and his dad went missing. He also confirmed that the skull was never identified. The case eventually closed due to lack of evidence. He wasn't willing to reopen the case, but he did agree to show me the skull. He led me down a dusty corridor in the station, past rows of locked files and abandoned evidence boxes, to a small, dimly lit room. There, nestled in a glass case, was the skull. It was bleached white by the sun, its eye sockets hollow and vacant. On the top of the skull, there was a jagged fracture, a testament to the violence that had taken place. I stared at the skull, my mind reeling, a wave of nausea washing over me. I saw Mark's face, his familiar smile, his bright, inquisitive eyes superimposed on the vacant skull. It was as though an invisible thread connected them, a thread woven from the fabric of memory, loss, and unfulfilled justice. The detective, sensing my turmoil, spoke softly. "It's a long shot, but we're still holding out hope that someone will come forward with information." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. I knew that the detective was right, that the possibility of finding Mark and his dad alive was practically non-existent. But the discovery of the skull had rekindled a spark of hope, a belief that the truth could still be unearthed, that justice could still be served, even after all these years. My investigation intensified. I delved deeper into the life of the Shadow, the mysterious figure who had haunted the local fishing community. I discovered that he was known for his ruthless tactics, his willingness to intimidate, and his ruthless pursuit of profits. I also learned that he had a history of disappearing after a string of unexplained accidents, leaving behind a trail of speculation and unanswered questions. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a chilling picture of a nefarious operation hidden in plain sight. I realized that the truth about Mark and his dad's disappearance lay buried beneath the surface, guarded by a web of lies and silence. I decided to follow the trail, to confront the darkness and bring the truth to light. I knew it was a dangerous path, but I was determined to see it through to the end. The investigation led me to a dilapidated pier at the far end of the bay. It was a forgotten place, shrouded in shadows, its planks rotting and warped, its once vibrant life fading into a ghost of its former self. As I approached the pier, a sense of dread washed over me. The air was thick with the smell of decay and salt, a harsh reminder of the ocean's destructive power. I felt a cold chill creep up my spine, a premonition of what awaited me. I started to walk on the pier, my footsteps echoing hollowly on the decaying wood. The pier creaked and groaned under my weight, as if protesting my intrusion. The wind howled, a mournful lament that sent shivers down my spine. I reached the end of the pier, where a dilapidated shack stood, its windows boarded up, its paint peeling and faded. The shack seemed to watch me, its presence heavy and oppressive. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. I had reached my destination, but I hesitated, my mind battling with my fear. A feeling of unease, a premonition of danger, washed over me. The silence of the pier was broken only by the howling wind and the distant cries of seagulls. I was alone, surrounded by darkness and the overwhelming sense that I was being watched. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. I had come this far, I couldn't turn back now. The truth was waiting for me, buried beneath the layers of lies and silence that surrounded this place. With a newfound determination, I pushed open the rickety door and stepped inside. The shack was small and dark, its interior filled with the musty smell of damp wood and decaying fish. A single bulb cast a dim, yellow light, barely illuminating the cobwebbed corners and the piles of junk scattered across the floor. I shivered, my teeth chattering slightly. The air was cold and damp, filled with the scent of salt and decay. A faint, metallic smell, reminiscent of blood, clung to the air. I slowly walked through the shack, my eyes scanning every crevice, every shadow. I was looking for clues, for a sign of what had happened to Mark and his dad. I felt a strange sense of urgency, a feeling that time was running out. I reached the back of the shack, where a small, metal door stood ajar. I pushed it open and stepped into a small, enclosed space. The air was thick with the smell of salt and decay, and the walls were covered in a layer of grime and mildew. A cold shiver ran down my spine. It was a small room, barely big enough for 2 people, and it was filled with tools, fishing gear, and other assorted junk. In the center of the room, a single, rusted bucket sat on the floor. My heart began to race. I knew that I had found something important, something that would lead me to the truth about Mark and his dad's disappearance. I slowly walked towards the bucket. As I drew closer, I noticed that the bucket was not empty. Something was inside. I reached out and lifted the lid. A sudden wave of nausea washed over me. The bucket was filled with a thick, viscous liquid, a mixture of blood and seawater. I saw a single, human hand, its fingers curled into a ghastly claw. The sight shattered the last vestiges of my composure. I stumbled back, my stomach churning. I had found what I had been looking for, but it was not what I had expected. I had found the evidence of a crime so horrific that it had been buried beneath the surface for years. Mark and his dad had not been victims of a storm. They had been brutally murdered, their bodies disposed of in the depths of the bay. The truth had finally been revealed, but it had come at a terrible price. The truth was a heavy burden, and I knew that my life would never be the same again. I stared at the bucket, my mind racing, trying to process the horrifying reality of what I had found. I had discovered the truth about Mark and his dad, but I had also opened a door to a world of darkness, a world of secrets and lies. I knew that I had to do something, that I could not let the truth remain buried. I had to find those responsible for this horrific crime and bring them to justice. I looked around the shack, my gaze falling on a small, weather-beaten notebook sitting on a shelf. I reached for it and opened it. The notebook was filled with handwritten notes, entries detailing fishing trips, logs of catches, and a collection of cryptic messages. As I read through the notebook, I began to understand the nature of the crime, the twisted motivations behind it. The notebook was a diary of a ruthless killer, a man obsessed with power and control. It was a glimpse into a world of secrecy and brutality, a world where the lines between right and wrong had been blurred beyond recognition. The notebook led me down a path of darkness, a path that led me to a world of hidden agendas, ruthless greed, and a web of lies that reached the highest levels of power in the town. The evidence was overwhelming, but I knew that this would not be easy. The people involved were powerful and well-connected, they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But I would not be deterred. I would expose the truth, even if it meant putting my own life on the line. The investigation continued, a relentless pursuit of justice that led me through the shadows of our seemingly idyllic town. I faced threats, intimidation, and danger, but I never wavered. I was driven by a sense of purpose, a determination to bring justice to Mark and his dad. After months of tireless work, I finally had the evidence I needed. It was a tangled web of lies, greed, and ruthless ambition. It was a story of betrayal, corruption, and the dark underbelly of a seemingly innocent community. The evidence pointed to a conspiracy that went far beyond Mark and his dad. It was a network of power and influence, a hidden empire built on corruption and greed. I delivered the evidence to the local authorities, my voice trembling as I revealed the truth. I told them about the notebook, the bucket of blood, and the dark secrets that had been hidden for so long. The authorities were stunned, hesitant at first, but the evidence was undeniable. A long, arduous investigation followed, culminating in a series of arrests and a trial that shocked the town. The truth, when it finally came to light, was a jarring revelation for the residents of the town. The supposed idyllic haven had been harboring a dark secret, a web of lies and corruption that had gone unchecked for years. Justice was served, but the scars of the tragedy remained. The town had been forever changed, its pristine image tarnished by the darkness that had been exposed. Mark and his dad's case became a painful reminder of the fragility of life, the unforgiving nature of the sea, and the dark secrets that can lurk beneath the surface of any community. I was left with a heavy burden, the weight of the truth bearing down on me. I had brought justice to Mark and his dad, but I had also seen the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of our world. I left the town, seeking solace and a new beginning. I carried the memory of Mark and his dad with me, a reminder of the importance of truth, justice, and the enduring power of hope. The mystery of Mark and his dad was solved, but the scars left by the tragedy would linger, a haunting reminder of the darkness that can exist even in the most unexpected of places. In the town I grew up in, a haunting tragedy unfolded that left an indelible scar on the community. A young woman in her 30s, a loving mother of 3, vanished without a trace, along with her children and their car. At first, whispers of marital discord spread like wildfire. The woman's husband, known for his reckless behavior, was immediately suspected of foul play. Days turned into sleepless nights as authorities searched high and low for any sign of the missing family, but to no avail. Her parents, frantic with worry, hadn't received any contact from their daughter. Her bank account remained untouched, a chilling indication that she hadn't simply run away. Yet, amidst the growing concern, an eerie silence hung in the air. It was as if the family had vanished into thin air. Nearly a week passed before a glimmer of hope emerged. One of the woman's 10-year-old son's friends mentioned his mother's unusual plan to take them to McDonald's for a McFlurry. This revelation sent shockwaves through the town. The nearest McDonald's was in a neighboring town, a route that deviated significantly from their usual path home. With renewed determination, search parties shifted their focus to the road leading to the restaurant. As they ventured deeper into the desolate countryside, a horrifying discovery awaited them. At the bottom of a massive dyke known as the 40-foot, they found the family's car submerged in the murky water. The scene that unfolded was one of unspeakable horror. The car's windows were shattered, its metal frame twisted and mangled. Inside, the woman and her 3 young children lay strapped into their seats, lifeless. The impact had been so severe that their bodies were gruesomely disfigured, their limbs broken and twisted in grotesque angles. As the realization sank in, a wave of collective grief washed over the community. The woman's husband, once the subject of suspicion, now found himself grappling with unimaginable pain. His world had been shattered in an instant, leaving him a desolate shell of the man he once was. In the aftermath of the tragedy, rumors and speculation ran rampant. Some whispered of a fatal accident, others of a deliberate act of despair. The truth remained elusive, forever shrouded in the murky depths of the 40-foot. A year later, the woman's husband found solace in the arms of another woman. Within a short time, they were engaged, and his fiancée announced her pregnancy. The news sent shockwaves through the town, reigniting the embers of anger and suspicion. Many questioned the timing of his newfound happiness, seeing it as a callous disregard for the memory of his deceased family. Others defended his right to move on, arguing that he deserved a chance to rebuild his life. The debate raged on, fueling a deep divide within the community. Some clung to the belief that he was responsible for the family's demise, while others held on to the hope that he was simply a victim of circumstance. As the years passed, the wounds of that fateful day slowly began to heal. The woman and her children were laid to rest in a peaceful cemetery, their graves adorned with flowers and mementos of their short lives. The 40-foot, once a symbol of tragedy, gradually became a place of remembrance, where people could come to reflect on the fragility of life and the enduring power of love. The woman's husband and his new family eventually moved away, seeking a fresh start far from the shadows of the past. But the haunting memories of that fateful night would forever linger in the minds of those who had witnessed the tragedy firsthand. In the end, the true story of what transpired that fateful night remains shrouded in mystery. But one thing is certain: the lives of countless individuals were forever altered by the unspeakable horror that unfolded at the bottom of the 40-foot. I still remember the day Sarah went missing. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that felt like it was always on repeat. The sun was high, the sky a pale blue, and the air hung heavy with the promise of a heat wave. I was sitting in my office, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to make sense, when the news broke. My phone buzzed with a frantic message from my neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, asking if I had seen Sarah. Sarah was her granddaughter, a sprightly 12-year-old with a bright smile and a laugh that could light up a room. Mrs. Johnson's message was followed by a flurry of calls from other parents, each one more panicked than the last. Sarah had vanished. She had been riding her bike, a bright pink monstrosity with a basket on the front, and suddenly she was gone. The town of Willow Creek, a sleepy hamlet tucked away in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, was a place where everyone knew everyone. We had a town square, a general store that doubled as the post office, and a church where the community gathered every Sunday. We prided ourselves on our sense of security, on the fact that our doors were always unlocked and our children could roam freely. Sarah's disappearance was like a crack in our idyllic facade, a jarring reminder that the world outside our little bubble was a dangerous place. The news spread like wildfire. It began with whispered conversations in the grocery store, escalating to hushed pronouncements at the town hall meeting. The police were called, the local news was notified, and the town descended into a frenzy of fear and suspicion. Search parties were organized, combing through the woods, scouring the streets, and peering into every nook and cranny of Willow Creek. The scent of pine needles and fear hung heavy in the air. I joined the search party, my heart heavy with dread. It felt surreal to be searching for a child, a little girl who should have been riding her bike, not lost in the woods. We looked everywhere, in the abandoned mine shafts, behind the overgrown cemetery, and even in the murky depths of the creek. We called her name, our voices hoarse and strained, hoping against hope that she would respond. Days turned into nights and the nights into weeks. Sarah was still missing. The town was on edge, the whispers turning into accusations. A local boy, a troubled teen named Matthew, had been seen talking to Sarah the day she disappeared. Matthew was a loner, a kid with a reputation for getting into trouble. He was a prime suspect, and despite his alibi, the whispers continued. The police questioned him, but without any concrete evidence, there was nothing they could do. The tension in the town was palpable. People started locking their doors, keeping their children indoors, and avoiding the woods altogether. It was like a collective gasp of fear had seized Willow Creek. It felt like a dark cloud had settled over the town, a suffocating blanket of suspicion and despair. Then, one cold, rainy day, a week after Sarah's disappearance, a stench began to rise from the garbage bins in the alley behind the town square. A group of teenagers, oblivious to the dread that hung in the air, were rummaging through the trash, searching for discarded treasures. They had been there for hours, until one of them stumbled upon something terrible, a metal trash can, overflowing with something that should never have been discarded. The teenagers were horrified. They ran, their screams echoing through the empty streets. They alerted the authorities, who arrived in a flurry of flashing lights and sirens. My heart dropped to my stomach as I witnessed the commotion from my window. I knew, somehow, what they had found. The news spread through the town like a plague. Sarah had been found. Dead. Her body, stuffed into a trash can, had been discarded like yesterday's garbage. A wave of grief, anger, and revulsion swept over Willow Creek. The investigation shifted into overdrive. The police questioned everyone, every neighbor, every friend, every acquaintance. They searched Sarah's belongings, hoping to find a clue, a piece of evidence that could lead them to her killer. The investigation became a race against time, a desperate attempt to bring her murderer to justice and provide some semblance of closure to the grieving town. The police finally focused their attention on Matthew. He was the last person seen with Sarah, and his story just didn't add up. After days of intense interrogation, he confessed. It turned out that Matthew wasn't alone. His older brother, John, had been involved in Sarah's disappearance. John was a quiet, unassuming teenager. He was the opposite of his younger brother, a model student and a church-going boy. He had always been Sarah's friend, a friendly face who would occasionally ride her home from school. But beneath the facade of normalcy, John harbored a dark secret. John had been planning to steal Sarah's bike for weeks. He had been watching her, studying her routine, waiting for the perfect opportunity. He had convinced his brother to help him, and together they had hatched a horrifying plan. On that fateful Tuesday, as Sarah was riding her bike, Matthew had approached her, feigning a friendly greeting. He had asked Sarah if she could use his bike pump, a simple ploy to lure her to their house. The boys knew Sarah wouldn't hesitate. She was a trusting soul, a girl who always saw the best in people. Sarah had followed Matthew to their house, a rundown 2-story building on the edge of town. John had been waiting for her in the basement, a dark, damp room filled with cobwebs and the smell of mildew. Sarah had immediately become suspicious when she saw John in the basement, but it was too late. John had grabbed Sarah, his grip tightening around her neck. She had screamed, her voice muffled by his hand. The sound had echoed through the basement, a chilling testament to the horror that was unfolding. Matthew had watched, his face a mask of fear and anticipation. John had strangled Sarah until her eyes bulged and her body went limp. He had carried her lifeless body to the basement floor, where he had left it, covered in a tarp. The brothers had planned to dispose of Sarah's body, to make it look like a runaway case. They had decided to wait until garbage night, when they would toss her body into a trash can and let it disappear with the rest of the discarded waste. Their plan had almost worked perfectly. They had almost gotten away with it. But fate, or perhaps karma, had intervened. The teenagers who had discovered Sarah's body in the trash can had unwittingly disrupted their heinous plot. The brothers were arrested and charged with murder. The town of Willow Creek was devastated. The news of Sarah's death spread like wildfire, and the town descended into a state of mourning. We held a vigil in the town square, our voices united in grief and anger. We lit candles, placed flowers on a makeshift memorial, and shared stories about Sarah, the vibrant young girl who had been taken from us too soon. The trial was a media circus. The brothers, forced to sit in the spotlight, were branded as monsters, their lives forever tarnished by their heinous crime. They were convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. The town of Willow Creek never fully recovered from Sarah's death. The sense of security was shattered, the innocence stolen. The wounds run deep, and the scars remain, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of even the most idyllic places. I've spent countless nights since that day trying to piece together what happened, trying to understand the minds of the boys who had taken Sarah's life. I've read countless psychology books and articles, hoping to find answers, to make sense of the senseless, but there are no easy answers. I've also grappled with my own guilt, the feeling that I should have done more, that I could have prevented Sarah's death. I've replayed that Tuesday over and over in my mind, searching for a missed signal, a chance encounter, a sign that could have changed the course of events. But there was nothing. Sarah's death was a tragedy, a senseless act of violence that shook the foundation of our town. It was a reminder of the fragility of life, the capriciousness of fate, and the darkness that dwells in the hearts of men. But amidst the pain and the grief, there was a flicker of hope. The community of Willow Creek, though wounded, was resilient. We came together, supporting each other, finding strength in our shared sorrow. We learned to live with the void left by Sarah's absence, carrying her memory in our hearts, a constant reminder of the preciousness of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. We built a playground in her memory, a place where children could laugh and play, a testament to the enduring power of joy even in the face of unimaginable loss. And the days went on, each one a little different, a little harder. The town of Willow Creek would never be the same. But we learned to live with the scars, to carry the memory of Sarah in our hearts, forever reminding us of the darkness that lurks in the world, and the importance of holding on to the light. I've seen a lot in my years on the force, but nothing prepared me for the case of Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. It started innocuously enough, a missing person report filed by her worried daughter, Mary. Mrs. Hayes, a frail, 70-year-old woman, suffered from dementia, her mind slowly slipping away like sand through an hourglass. She lived alone, a small, quaint cottage nestled in the rolling hills overlooking the harbor. Her routine was predictable: wake up, make breakfast, tend to her garden, and then, most often, go for a walk. The problem was, sometimes her walks lost their sense of purpose. She'd wander off the path, her memory a flickering candle in the wind, until a neighbor would find her, confused and disoriented. These episodes were becoming more frequent, and Mary, worried sick, finally decided to call the police. We were a small department, a tight-knit group of officers who knew every corner of our island, our little slice of America nestled 30 miles off the coast, cut off from the mainland by the relentless churn of the ocean. We knew Mrs. Hayes, a kindly old soul who waved to us from her porch with a smile that crinkled her eyes. "She's harmless, just needs a little help finding her way back home," Detective Miller, our senior officer, had said, his voice tinged with a weary nostalgia for simpler times. But this time, things were different. The sun had set, the sky a bruised purple bleeding into a deep indigo, when Mary called, her voice tight with panic. Mrs. Hayes was gone. No one had seen her since noon. Every house on the path she usually took had been checked, every corner of the island scoured. We worked through the night, the cold November wind biting at our faces as we searched the cliffside overlooking the ocean, the churning waves a dark, menacing presence below. We called in the state police, their K9s sniffing the air, their noses twitching with a keen sense of urgency. News helicopters buzzed overhead, their spotlights cutting through the darkness, their cameras trained on the island, a silent sentinel of hope and despair. The Coast Guard, alerted by the seriousness of the situation, dispatched boats and helicopters, their searchlights illuminating the water, looking for any sign of the missing woman. Hope, like a fragile flower, began to wilt under the pressure of time, the weight of the unknown. The next day, the island became a hive of activity. We interviewed neighbors, friends, anyone who might have seen Mrs. Hayes, even the stray dog that wandered the streets, its tail wagging, its nose twitching, but providing no clue. We reviewed security footage from the airport and steamship ferry, hoping she had boarded either to leave the island, but there was no sign of her. The days melted into weeks, the initial frantic hope morphing into a quiet, agonizing despair. We spent long hours poring over maps, retracing Mrs. Hayes's known paths, our minds teeming with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. "She could have wandered into the woods," Detective Miller suggested, his brow furrowed, his eyes searching mine, a silent plea for confirmation, an attempt to find a sliver of solace in a world that seemed to be crumbling around us. But the woods were dense, the undergrowth thick, and in the cold grip of winter, the possibility of finding her alive was dwindling. "Or the ocean," I said, my voice a whisper, the word a chill in the air, a stark reminder of the vast, unforgiving expanse that lay just beyond our island's edge. Our investigation hit a dead end. We were no closer to finding Mrs. Hayes, the mystery deepening with each passing day. We had exhausted every avenue, looked at every inch of this island, and still, she remained lost, a ghost in the wind. And then, the whispers started. First, they were just murmurs, hushed conversations at the back of the local diner, the soft rustling of secrets in the shadows of the local grocery store. "Did you hear? They found a body, washed up on the beach." It's probably her. Poor woman, God rest her soul. We were summoned, our hearts heavy with a dread we couldn't fully articulate. The body, mangled and disfigured, was beyond recognition. But there was something familiar about the pale, wrinkled hand, a ring on her finger, a small, silver charm shaped like a dove. It was hers. The news, when it broke, sent a shiver down the spines of everyone on the island. The whispers turned into a torrent of speculation, fear, and grief. Mrs. Hayes, our sweet old neighbor, had met a tragic end, swallowed by the churning maw of the ocean. But the questions lingered. How had she ended up so far from her usual path? Why hadn't any of us seen her on the beach? And most importantly, where had she been all those weeks? The official cause of death was drowning, the investigation closed, the case considered solved. But deep down, I knew something was amiss. I had seen far too many things in my years on this island, far too many mysteries that lay beneath the surface of their apparent solutions. The whispers that haunted the island, however, didn't linger on the ocean. They moved towards another direction, whispering of a new construction site, a burgeoning sewer plant, a concrete and steel monolith rising from the heart of the island. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by the collective fear and unanswered questions. She went into the sewer plant, a fisherman told me, his eyes wide with a chilling mixture of horror and fascination. She fell into that huge tank, the one they were building to hold all the waste. They say they covered it up before the concrete hardened, and now, she's buried alive. I went to the site, a skeletal outline of unfinished steel and concrete, a symbol of progress and a chilling reminder of our collective human fallibility. I stood at the edge of the massive tank, its cavernous depths a bottomless pit of darkness, the smell of raw sewage hanging heavy in the air. I thought of Mrs. Hayes, her frail form lost in the cold embrace of the ocean, but now this chilling image of her trapped, alone, in the reeking depths of this concrete tomb, was more unsettling, more horrifying. The image was so vivid, so real, that it felt more like a memory than a figment of my imagination. The case was closed, but the questions refused to be silenced. The ocean had spoken, but its voice was a chorus of whispers, a symphony of unanswered questions, a haunting reminder of the mysteries that lay hidden beneath the surface of our seemingly idyllic island life. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that the truth lay buried beneath the layers of assumptions and the comforting embrace of closure. A few months later, during a routine patrol, I was driving down a quiet country road, the sun a fiery orb setting over the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape. I saw a glimmer of silver in the distance, a flash of light in the dying embers of the day. I pulled off to the side of the road, my heart pounding, my mind racing. It was a small, silver dove, a charm, lying alone in the dirt, a tiny, forgotten relic of a life lost, a silent testament to the enduring mystery of Mrs. Hayes' disappearance. I picked it up, its smooth surface cool against my fingers, the metal surprisingly heavy for its size. I knew then that I couldn't let it go, that I had to find out what really happened to Mrs. Hayes. The ocean had whispered its story, but it was only half the truth. The whispers had been right. I needed to dig deeper, to unearth the secrets buried beneath the surface of our idyllic island life. I needed to find the truth, no matter how dark or unsettling it might be. For Mrs. Hayes, for everyone, I needed to find out what happened to her. I needed to give her a voice, to find her a resting place, to find peace in the face of a mystery that had haunted us all. And so, my journey began. I started with the construction site, the sewer plant, the dark, forbidding concrete monolith that loomed over the landscape. I needed to find out if the whispers were true, if she was truly buried alive, encased in the cold embrace of the concrete, a silent prisoner in the heart of our island. I started with the foreman, a gruff, weathered man, his face a road map of sun-baked skin and lines etched by years of hard labor. He spoke with a reluctance that spoke volumes, his words carefully chosen, his movements measured. He confirmed that Mrs. Hayes had been seen wandering through the construction site just before it was sealed, but he insisted it couldn't have been her in the tank, as the tank was filled with waste, and the concrete had hardened. But I had seen the dove, a tangible piece of evidence, and the whispers were too numerous, too unsettling to ignore. I was determined to find the truth, even if it meant going against the grain, challenging the comforting narrative we had constructed. It took weeks, but slowly, piece by piece, I started to unravel the truth. A talk with a disgruntled employee, a disgruntled worker, a disgruntled soul, who had seen something, heard something, and held it close to his chest, fearing his own safety and security. He spoke of a late-night shift, of a careless move, of a misplaced safety protocol, a missing grate, a careless oversight. He told me about the hurried, frantic search for Mrs. Hayes that night, a search that ended in a chilling discovery. A scream, a thud, a splash, the sound of concrete being poured, a rushed covering up of mistakes, and a hasty attempt to erase the evidence of a life lost. My investigation was a lonely trek, a solitary journey through the shadows of truth and deceit. I knew I was walking a dangerous path, a path that could lead to more than just the truth, a path that could lead to danger and even harm. But the truth was more important. The truth was an obligation, a debt owed to Mrs. Hayes, to the island, to my own sense of justice. And so, I kept digging, searching, for answers, for closure, for the truth. I found it in the form of a crumpled piece of paper, a blueprint of the sewer plant, a detail highlighted in red, a single word scrawled across the page. Oversight. The truth was a dark, unsettling thing, a reminder of the fragility of life, the fragility of memory, and the fragility of our human systems. I presented my findings to the authorities, the truth laid bare, the evidence irrefutable. It wasn't easy to convince them, to pry open the sealed case, to reopen a wound that had begun to heal. But I persisted, driven by a sense of urgency, a moral imperative, a responsibility to Mrs. Hayes and her memory. The investigation was reopened, the evidence reviewed, the truth validated. The construction site, once a symbol of progress and development, became a monument to carelessness and tragedy. The sewer plant, a testament to our ingenuity, became a grim reminder of our fallibility. Mrs. Hayes was finally laid to rest, her body recovered from the tank, a somber ceremony marking the end of a long, agonizing search. But the whispers persisted, a haunting reminder of the mystery, the tragedy, the truth that had been hidden for so long. They whispered of the island, its beauty, its secrets, its hidden depths, its unforgiving nature. They whispered of Mrs. Hayes, her gentle soul, her loving heart, her fragile mind, and her untimely demise. And they whispered of me, the officer who had dared to challenge the narrative, who had dared to seek the truth, who had dared to give a voice to a woman who had been silenced.